Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to our 10th lesson today. Today we're going to start with a picture and we will play riddles. Okay, look at the picture on the screen and tell me, what do you think this picture comes from? It's a very well known picture around the world, and I guess you have seen it before in some history books. Okay, think about it. I guess you hit the point, but in case you didn't, this is a picture of the French Revolution, and this is one of the topics we're going to discuss today. Okay. Okay, so the French Revolution. But before we start talking about it, we need to discuss what was the period before the French Revolution. We were coming from the medieval period, and in which thinking was rather differently. Okay, let's see. We are coming from 800 years of serfdoms, guilds, feudal dues, monastic orders, favoritism to nobility and clergy, barbaric-like life, hunting rights, and abusive laws. So the world, until this point, still responded to some values and principles connected to feudalism and the power of the nobility and the power of the clergy and the aristocratic social class. There was a respect and veneration for the past. Everything that was before was considered to be better and was considered to be good. Okay, there was, let's say, nostalgia in the Latin sense. There was a nostalgic feeling and sentiments towards the past. Former times were considered to be better, so that men look backwards rather than forwards. Okay, there was, let's say, an incapacity to look forward to the future. They rather look backwards. So our fathers and our forefathers had a better life and had a better prospect to what we have nowadays. Because of that, the authority of scholastic thinkers and books were the official word, let's say. Okay, so they respected the authorities of Saint Augustine, Aristotle, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Abelard, Plato, Plotinus, and all the ancient and medieval, let's say, thinkers. The university main business then was not to increase knowledge or to investigate into new grounds. They were not interested in discovering new topics or new, let's say, grounds in the scientific arena, but they were only concerned into imparting and explaining the official word. The official word, as we said before, were the scholastics, thinkers, and books. Okay, so in that sense, the education was biased to theology and philosophy rather than to explore nature and the world we live in, or the world they lived in, right? So this veneration for the past, let's say, put the brake into the advance of scientific discoveries. So with the eve of the 18th century, the experimentation and investigation brought fresh and suspicious airs. So they started to make some brand new discoveries and through experimentation, but at the same time, these new discoveries were seen as suspicious and were seen as bad because they were considered to be to threaten the theological authorities or the authority of the nobility or the authority of the aristocratic class. So with the new discoveries, with the new investigations, they started to use brand new tools and machines and equipments, apparatus, caused revelation, and they threw new lights into the way they saw the world. The Bible and theological texts were gradually replaced by scientific texts based upon evidence, test, and experimentation. Bear in mind that the Bible, the scriptures, and the theological text written by the church authorities, let's say, they didn't have to be tested. It was not necessary. It was the word of God, the word of God that came to humanity through this, let's say, illumination on the men to write these books. So there was no need to test these books. They were out of the question. All right, with the new experimentation and with the new discoveries, they started to think differently about it. So reason takes the place that faith has been unquestionably holding. Some brilliant men, such as Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, started to turn up, and they started to, let's say, to raise awareness and consciousness on the world, on to think by themselves instead of waiting to be told what they had to do or what they had to think or what they had to do regarding to their life, regarding to their faith, regarding to their daily manners, habits. So because of these men, Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, and so many others, you see in the picture, the French Revolution was possible, okay, because the common people started to think and they started to question the authority, not only the authority of the church, but the authority of the king and the authority of the nobility. Okay, we are equals now. They were not chosen by God, as they said, as the books that were written by the priests and the clergy say. No, we're equals. So we claim for liberty, we claim for equality, and we claim for fraternity. Okay, these were the standards used by the revolutionary to do away the absurd and unreasonable system and way of life of the nobility and the clergy, right? So these were the foundation of the French Revolution. So the nobility and the clergy represented the old and equal system supported by the status quo caused by dogmatism and religious belief. Okay, so with the eve of the 18th century, there was a breakup. They broke the chains that had them prisoned to the old system and the old ideas that tied them up and kept them, let's say, slaves of the aristocracy and of the nobility and the clergy. All right, okay. So far, this is what we have to discuss about the French Revolution. Of course, you are supposed to follow up the reading in the books, but for the time being, we will stop and I'll see you in the next video.